The phone rang at 3:17 a.m., jolting me from sleep with the kind of urgency that only comes with death or disaster. Grandfather Henry's voice was barely a whisper when I answered, weakened by the cancer that had been consuming him for months. But his words cut through my drowsiness with razor-sharp clarity. "Jessica, never trust your mother. She's not who you think she is." I thought it was delirium speaking, the morphine, or maybe the brain fog that comes with dying. Grandfather had been in hospice care for 2 weeks, drifting in and out of consciousness, sometimes calling me by my deceased grandmother's name, or asking about people who'd been dead for decades. But there was something different in his voice that night, a lucidity that made my skin prickle with unease. "Grandpa, what are you talking about? It's late, you should rest." "Listen to me," he interrupted, his voice gaining strength with desperate urgency. "There's an envelope under my bed, taped to the box spring. Find it before she does. Promise me, Jessica." The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone in the darkness of my apartment. By morning, the hospice nurse called to tell me he'd passed peacefully in his sleep around 4 a.m., less than an hour after our strange conversation. I drove to his house immediately, my mother Claire meeting me there with red-rimmed eyes and the efficient grief of someone who'd been preparing for this moment for months. She moved through his belongings with practiced determination, sorting items into boxes marked keep, donate, and trash with a methodical precision that seemed almost cold. "I'll handle the bedroom," she said when I offered to help. "You focus on the living room." There's so much to go through, but I couldn't stop thinking about grandfather's words, the envelope he'd mentioned, the warning that my mother wasn't who I thought she was. When Claire stepped outside to talk with the funeral director, I slipped into the bedroom and dropped to my knees beside his bed. The envelope was exactly where he'd said it would be, taped to the underside of the box spring with yellowing adhesive that suggested it had been hidden there for years. My name was written across the front in grandfather's careful handwriting, along with the date from 3 months ago, when he'd first been diagnosed. Inside were photographs that made my hands shake, pictures of my mother from what looked like the 1980s, but she appeared to be in some kind of institutional setting. Stark white walls, metal furniture, people in what looked like prison uniforms. But it was the newspaper clipping that made my blood run cold. Local woman suspected in child disappearance case with a photograph of my mother. 25 years younger, but unmistakably her. The article was dated 1987, 2 years before I was born. According to the text, Claire Morrison, not Claire Patterson. The surname I'd grown up with had been questioned in connection with the disappearance of a 6-year-old girl named Amy Chen. The child had vanished from a playground in Portland, Oregon, and witnesses had seen her talking to a woman matching my mother's description just before she disappeared. No charges were filed due to lack of evidence, the article concluded, but Morrison remains a person of interest in the ongoing investigation. I heard my mother's footsteps in the hallway and quickly shoved the envelope into my jacket pocket, my heart hammering against my ribs. When she entered the bedroom, she was carrying a large garbage bag and wearing the same calm expression she'd maintained all day. "Find anything interesting?" she asked, and something in her tone made me wonder if she already knew what I'd discovered. "Just some old books," I lied, forcing my voice to remain steady. "Nothing important." But as I watched her efficiently strip the bed and dismantle grandfather's final refuge, I realized that everything I'd believed about my family was built on lies. The woman who'd raised me, who'd taught me right from wrong, who'd been my anchor through every storm of my life, was connected to the disappearance of a child. And my grandfather had died trying to warn me about her. That night, alone in my apartment with the envelope spread across my kitchen table, I began to understand that my entire life had been constructed around a secret so dark that my own grandfather had feared for my safety. The woman I called Mom was someone else entirely, and whatever she'd done in 1987 was terrible enough that 35 years later, a dying man had used his last breath to warn his granddaughter about her. The question that kept me awake until dawn was simple but terrifying. If my mother had been willing to make a child disappear once before, what would she do to keep her secret safe now? I called in sick to work the next morning, unable to concentrate on anything except the contents of Grandfather Henry's envelope. Spread across my dining room table were artifacts of a life I'd never known existed: photographs, documents, and newspaper clippings that painted a picture of my mother as someone completely different from the quiet librarian who'd raised me. The photographs were the most disturbing. Multiple images of Claire in what appeared to be a psychiatric facility, wearing institutional clothing and sitting in sparse clinical rooms. But it wasn't the setting that made my hands shake, it was her expression. In every photo, my mother's face held a cold calculation that I'd never seen before, as if she were studying something with predatory interest. One photograph showed her with other patients in what looked like a group therapy session. The back of the photo was labeled in grandfather's handwriting, Riverside Mental Health Facility, 1986-1987, court-ordered evaluation, court-ordered. My mother had been committed to a psychiatric facility by legal mandate, not voluntary treatment. I found her medical records tucked behind the photographs pages of psychiatric evaluations that used terms I had to look up online. Antisocial personality disorder, lack of empathy, manipulative behavior patterns, risk of harm to others. The final evaluation, dated just weeks before little Amy Chun disappeared, recommended continued institutional care. Patient shows no genuine remorse for past actions and continues to demonstrate concerning behavioral patterns around children, one doctor had written. Release not recommended at this time. Yet somehow, Claire had been released just days before Amy Chun vanished from that Portland playground. I cross-referenced the dates with the newspaper clipping grandfather had saved. Amy Chun disappeared on June 15, 1987. My mother was discharged from Riverside Mental Health Facility on June 12. 3 days. She'd been free for exactly 3 days before a child went missing. But the most chilling discovery was a handwritten letter tucked between the medical records, addressed to Henry Patterson in my mother's careful script. Dear Henry, by the time you read this, I'll be gone and your granddaughter will be safe with you. I know what people think about me, what they suspect, but I need you to understand that everything I did was for Jessica. She deserves a mother who can give her a normal life, not someone whose past will follow her forever. Please don't let anyone hurt her because of my mistakes. Claire. The letter was dated 1989, the year I was born. But I'd been raised by my mother, not my grandfather. She hadn't disappeared, she stayed and raised me herself, which meant either the letter was never sent, or something had changed her mind about leaving. I spent the afternoon researching Amy Chun's case online, finding archived news articles and true crime forums that had kept the story alive for decades. The details were heartbreaking. Amy had been playing at Riverside Park when witnesses saw her talking to a woman near the playground equipment. Security cameras from a nearby store had captured footage of Amy walking away with an adult female, but the image quality was too poor for positive identification. The woman appeared to know the child. One witness statement read, Amy went with her willingly, like she trusted her. Amy Chun's body was never found. Her parents had spent 35 years searching, organizing volunteer efforts, maintaining a website with age progression photos showing what their daughter might look like now. The pain in their online posts was raw and immediate, as if Amy had disappeared yesterday instead of decades ago. But it was the physical description of the suspect that made my stomach drop. Caucasian female, approximately 25 years old, 5 feet 6 inches tall, brown hair, wearing jeans and a red jacket. Witnesses described her as friendly and good with children. The description matched my mother perfectly, down to the red jacket I'd seen in family photos from that era. I was still staring at Amy Chun's school photograph, a bright-eyed 6-year-old with pigtails and a gap-toothed smile when my phone rang. Mom's number appeared on the screen, and for the first time in my life, I hesitated before answering. Jessica, honey, I was thinking about coming over tonight to cook dinner. Her voice was warm and familiar, the same maternal tone that had comforted me through every childhood crisis. I know yesterday was difficult, losing Grandpa and all. That's okay, Mom. I think I need some time alone. Are you sure? You don't sound like yourself. There was something different in her voice now, a careful attention that made me wonder if she was analyzing my responses. Is everything all right? I looked at Amy Chun's photograph, at my mother's psychiatric evaluations, at the newspaper clipping that connected them both to a tragedy that had destroyed a family. "Everything's fine," I lied. "I'll call you tomorrow." But as I hung up the phone, I realized that my mother wasn't just calling to check on me. She was checking to see if I'd found something I shouldn't have found, probing to determine whether her 35-year-old secret was still safe. And for the first time in my 28 years of life, I was afraid of the woman who'd raised me. I drove to the Portland Public Library the next morning, needing to research away from my apartment where my mother might unexpectedly visit. The microfiche archives contained newspaper coverage of Amy Chen's disappearance. There wasn't available online detailed reporting from local papers that had followed the story for months. What I discovered made the hair on my arms stand up. The investigation hadn't focused solely on my mother because of witness descriptions. It had focused on her because of her documented history with children. According to a police report from 1985, Claire Morrison had been arrested for inappropriate contact with minors at a daycare center where she'd worked in Eugene, Oregon. The charges were eventually dropped when the family declined to press charges, but the incident had triggered a psychological evaluation that led to her court-ordered commitment at Riverside Mental Health Facility. Morrison showed an unusual fixation on the children in her care, the police report noted. Parents complained that she knew details about their children's lives that went beyond normal caregiver relationships. One parent reported finding Morrison in their child's bedroom during a babysitting assignment, claiming she was checking on the sleeping child at 11 p.m. The pattern was becoming clear. My mother hadn't just been suspected in Amy Chen's disappearance because of witness descriptions. She'd been suspected because she had a documented history of concerning behavior around children. I found more articles from smaller regional papers, stories that painted a picture of a woman who left a trail of worried parents and uncomfortable incidents across multiple Oregon communities, always moving before formal complaints could be filed, always finding new jobs working with children despite her troubling history. But it was an interview with Amy Chen's mother that broke my heart completely. Mrs. Chen described the moment she realized her daughter was missing, the frantic search that followed, the years of sleepless nights wondering what had happened to her little girl. Amy was so trusting, Mrs. Chen had told reporters. She would have gone with anyone who seemed nice to her. She loved making new friends. Whoever took her knew exactly how to approach a child like Amy. I sat in the library parking lot afterward, staring at photocopies of articles and police reports, trying to reconcile this information with my memories of my mother. Claire Patterson had been loving, attentive, devoted, everything a mother should be. She'd never shown any signs of the concerning behavior described in these documents. But then I remembered things that hadn't seemed significant at the time. The way she'd always insisted on knowing every detail about my friends and their families. Her tendency to ask probing questions about my teachers, my coaches, anyone who worked with children. The fact that we'd moved frequently during my early childhood always to new towns where no one knew our history. And I remembered how good she'd been with other people's children. Neighborhood kids had always gravitated toward her, drawn by her patient attention and her uncanny ability to understand what they needed. I'd been proud of having such a popular mom, never questioning why children seemed to trust her so immediately. My phone buzzed with a text from Claire. "Haven't heard from you today. Just wanted to make sure you're okay. Love you." I stared at the message, wondering if this was genuine maternal concern or something more calculated. Was she monitoring my activities, worried that I might be discovering things about her past? I decided to test her reaction. I texted back, "I'm fine. Been going through some of Grandpa's old things. Found some interesting family photos." Her response came back immediately. "What kind of photos? I'd love to see them." The speed of her reply and the immediate follow-up question confirmed my suspicions. She wasn't just making conversation, she was trying to determine what I found. "Just old pictures of you from before I was born. You looked so different when you were younger." This time, her response took 10 minutes. "Those old photos aren't very flattering. I'd rather you didn't share them with anyone. Some memories are better left in the past." The phrasing was careful, diplomatic, but the message was clear. She didn't want me looking at old photographs. and she especially didn't want me sharing them with anyone else. I drove to Riverside Mental Health Facility that afternoon, now a modern outpatient clinic that bore no resemblance to the institutional setting in grandfather's photographs. But the records department still maintained archives from the facility's previous incarnation as a residential psychiatric hospital. "I'm researching my family history," I told the clerk. "My mother was a patient here in the 1980s, and I'm trying to understand her medical history for genetic counseling purposes." It was a lie, but it was a lie that might get me access to information I needed. The clerk consulted her computer system. "What was your mother's name?" "Claire Morrison." "She would have been admitted in 1986. The clerk's expression changed subtly, and she looked at me with mute interest. "Morrison ... That name sounds familiar. Let me check our restricted files." She disappeared into a back office for 15 minutes, returning with a thin folder and a cautious expression. "I can't release medical records without proper authorization," she said carefully. "But I can tell you that your mother's case file has been flagged for law enforcement access. There are still active inquiries related to her time here." Active inquiries. 35 years later, law enforcement was still interested in my mother's psychiatric treatment and the timing of her release, which meant Amy Chen's case was still open, and my mother was still a suspect. That evening, I created a timeline on my apartment wall, using colored string to connect dates, locations, and events like a detective tracking a serial killer. What emerged was a pattern that made my hands shake as I plotted each point. My mother had been present in 4 different Oregon communities where children had gone missing between 1983 and 1989. Amy Chen in Portland was just the most documented case because witnesses had seen her with the suspect. But archival newspaper searches revealed other disappearances that had received less attention. Children who'd vanished from smaller communities where my mother had worked at daycare centers, schools, or after-school programs. Timothy Walsh, age 4, disappeared from a park in Eugene in 1984 while my mother was working at Little Angels Daycare. Sarah Mitchell, age 7, went missing from her school in Salem in 1985, 3 months before my mother was arrested for inappropriate contact with minors. Kevin Barnes, age 5, vanished from a community festival in Bend in 1988, where my mother had been volunteering with the Children's Activities booth. Each case followed the same pattern: children who disappeared without a trace, with no bodies ever found, no ransom demands, no clear motive except the removal of the child from their family. And in each case, my mother had been present in the community and had documented contact with children through her work. But it was the 5th case that made me sink into my kitchen chair with growing horror. Jessica Chen, Amy's older sister, age 8, had gone missing from the same Portland playground exactly 1 year before Amy disappeared. The cases had been investigated separately because different detective teams were assigned to each disappearance, and the connection between the sisters hadn't been immediately apparent. Jessica Chen, the same name as mine. I found a photograph of Jessica Chen in an archived news article about her disappearance. She looked exactly like I had at age 8, same dark hair, same brown eyes, same heart-shaped face. The resemblance was so striking that for a moment, I wondered if I was looking at a photograph of myself. But that was impossible. Jessica Chen had been born in 1978. I was born in 1989. We couldn't be the same person, despite the identical appearance and shared first name. Unless my birth certificate was as fabricated as everything else about my mother's identity. I called the Portland Police Department's cold case unit, my voice shaking as I asked to speak with someone about the Chen family disappearances. Detective Maria Santos, who'd inherited the cases from retired investigators, agreed to meet with me the following day. "You said you have information about the Chen sisters?" Detective Santos asked when I arrived at the police station. She was younger than I'd expected, with the kind of focused intensity that suggested she took cold cases personally. "I think my mother might have been involved in their disappearances," I said, spreading grandfather's photographs and documents across her desk. "Her name was Claire Morrison in 1987, but she's been using the name Claire Patterson for the past 30 years. Detective Santos studied the materials with professional interest. occasionally making notes or asking clarifying questions. But it was when I showed her the photograph of 8-year-old Jessica Chen that her expression changed completely. "Where did you get this?" she asked, holding up the newspaper clipping. "From archived news reports." "Why?" "Because this isn't from our files." This photograph was never released to the media. Detective Santos was staring at the image with growing alarm. The only copies of this school photo were given to the investigating officers and kept in the family's private collection. The implications hit me like a physical blow. If the photograph in grandfather's collection was never publicly available, then someone had obtained it directly from the police investigation or from the Chun family themselves. "Detective," I said slowly, "I think my mother didn't just know about Jessica Chen's disappearance. I think she kept a trophy." Santos was already reaching for her phone. "I need you to stay right here while I make some calls. And I need you to think very carefully about your safety. If your mother realizes you're investigating these cases... double quotes, she didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. A woman who'd made 5 children disappear over the course of 6 years wouldn't hesitate to eliminate a threat to her freedom, even if that threat was her own daughter." While Detective Santos made her calls, I sat in the police station lobby and tried to process what I learned. My mother wasn't just suspected of taking Amy Chen, she was connected to a series of child disappearances that spanned multiple communities and years. She'd been hunting children with the methodical patience of a predator, using her jobs in childcare and education as cover for her crimes. And somehow my grandfather had known. He'd collected evidence, documented her crimes, and hidden the proof until his death gave him the opportunity to warn me. But why had he waited so long? Why protect a woman he knew was dangerous? Why allow me to be raised by someone capable of making children disappear? My phone rang with a call from my mother, and for the first time in my life, I let it go to voicemail. When I listened to the message later, her voice sounded different, strained, worried, searching. "Jessica, honey, I haven't heard from you in 2 days. I'm starting to worry. Please call me back. I love you." But as I sat in that police station, surrounded by evidence of her crimes, I realized that my mother's love might be the most dangerous thing of all. Because if she'd been willing to destroy entire families to possess the children she wanted, what would she do to keep the child she'd already claimed? Detective Santos returned with news that made my blood run cold. The Portland Police Department had been quietly investigating my mother for 3 years. Ever since DNA evidence from the original crime scenes had been reprocessed using modern techniques, they'd identified Claire Morrison as their primary suspect, but hadn't been able to locate her because she'd been living under the assumed identity of Claire Patterson. "Your grandfather contacted us 6 months ago," Detective Santos revealed. "He'd figured out your mother's real identity and wanted to cooperate with our investigation. But he was concerned about your safety if she discovered what he was doing, so he was working with the police. Henry Patterson provided us with valuable information about your mother's behavior patterns and psychological state. He'd been documenting her actions for years, trying to build a case that would put her away without putting you at risk." Detective Santos showed me transcripts of conversations my grandfather had recorded with my mother, discussions where she'd made references to special children and keeping them safe in ways that suggested she believed her crimes were acts of protection rather than kidnapping. "Your mother exhibits classic signs of delusional thinking," Detective Santos explained. "She genuinely believes she was rescuing these children from inadequate parents or dangerous situations. In her mind, she was saving them, not harming them. What happened to them? To the children she took?" Detective Santos was quiet for a long moment, consulting files that contained information I probably didn't want to hear. "We don't know for certain. No bodies have ever been found. But based on psychological profiles and similar cases, we believe she may have eliminated them when they became too difficult to manage or when she fixated on acquiring new children." The room tilted sideways as I processed what she was telling me. My mother hadn't just kidnapped children, she'd likely murdered them when they no longer served her psychological needs. "Why am I different? Why didn't she ... Why did she keep me?" "Because you weren't stolen," Detective Santos said gently. "According to your grandfather's information, You were born to your mother during a relationship she had with a man named David Patterson in 1989. You were the child she wanted to keep, not one she felt compelled to take from someone else. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by guilt. I was alive because I was her biological daughter, while 5 other children had died because they weren't. We need your help, Detective Santos continued. Your mother trusts you, and she's been careful to avoid law enforcement for 35 years. If we're going to arrest her and close these cases, we need evidence that she can't deny or explain away. What kind of evidence? A confession. Something that proves her involvement in these disappearances. Detective Santos leaned forward, her expression intense. Jessica, I know this is asking a lot, but would you be willing to wear a recording device and try to get your mother to admit what she did? The thought of confronting my mother with accusations of child murder made my stomach clench with fear. But I thought about Amy Chung's parents still maintaining a website 35 years later, still hoping for answers about their daughter. I thought about Timothy Walsh and Sarah Mitchell and Kevin Barnes and Jessica Chung, children whose families had never gotten closure, never gotten justice. What if she realizes what I'm doing? What if she becomes dangerous? We'll have officers positioned nearby, ready to intervene if needed. But Jessica, you need to understand that your mother is already dangerous. She's been living a lie for decades. And if she suspects her identity has been compromised, she might disappear again or eliminate anyone who threatens her freedom, including me. I agreed to wear the wire, and Detective Santos scheduled the confrontation for the following evening at my mother's house. I would invite myself over for dinner, steer the conversation toward family history, and try to get her to admit her involvement in the disappearances. That night, I practiced conversations in my mirror, trying to figure out how to approach someone I'd loved my entire life with accusations of being a serial child killer. How do you ask your own mother if she murdered 5 innocent children? How do you pretend everything is normal when you're wearing a recording device designed to capture her confession? When I called to invite myself to dinner, my mother's voice was bright with pleasure and relief. Oh, Jessica, I'm so glad you called. I was worried about you. Of course, come over. I'll make your favorite chicken parmesan. She sounded so genuinely happy, so motherly and warm, that for a moment I wondered if I was making a terrible mistake. Maybe Detective Santos was wrong about the evidence. Maybe there was an innocent explanation for everything grandfather had collected. But then I thought about Jessica Chung's photograph, the image that was never released to the public, but somehow ended up in my mother's collection. Some truths couldn't be explained away, no matter how much I wanted to believe in my mother's innocence. The next evening, I drove to my childhood home with a recording device taped to my chest and a heart full of dread. I was about to discover whether the woman who'd raised me was a loving mother who'd made mistakes, or a monster who spent decades perfecting the art of making children disappear. My mother's house smelled like childhood chicken parmesan and vanilla candles, the same comforting aromas that had greeted me after school for 18 years. Claire met me at the door with a warm hug that felt no different from thousands of embraces she'd given me throughout my life. And for a moment, I almost forgot why I was there. You look tired, honey, she said, studying my face with the keen attention that had always made me feel loved and understood. Are you sleeping okay? I know losing Grandpa has been hard on both of us. We ate dinner while discussing ordinary things, my job, her book club, plans for Grandfather's memorial service. My mother was exactly as she'd always been, attentive, caring, interested in every detail of my life. The recording device felt heavy against my chest as I struggled to find a way to transition from casual conversation to accusations of child murder. Mom, I said finally, as she cleared our plates, I've been going through some of Grandpa's old things, and I found some photographs of you that I'd never seen before. Her hands stilled for just a moment as she rinsed dishes, but her voice remained casual. Oh, what kind of photographs? From when you were younger? Before I was born, you looked different somehow. Claire dried her hands carefully and turned to face me, her expression neutral but watchful. Different how? Sadder, maybe. Like you'd been through something difficult. I was improvising now, trying to create an opening for her to talk about her past. There was one photo of you in what looked like a hospital or institution of some kind. Your grandfather kept too many old things, she said dismissively. Not all memories are worth preserving, Jessica, but I caught something in her tone, careful control that suggested my questions were making her uncomfortable. Were you sick when you were younger? Is that why you were in the hospital? Claire sat back down at the kitchen table, her movements deliberate and measured. I went through a difficult period in my 20s. Your grandfather helped me get the treatment I needed to become healthy again. It's not something I like to talk about. What kind of treatment? Therapy, counseling, help with some personal issues that were affecting my judgment. She met my eyes directly, and for the first time I could see calculation behind her maternal concern. Why are you asking these questions, Jessica? My heart was racing, but I forced myself to continue. I found some newspaper clippings too, about children who went missing in Oregon in the 1980s. Your name was mentioned in connection with one of the cases. The change in my mother's expression was subtle but unmistakable. The warmth drained from her eyes, replaced by the cold assessment I'd seen in those psychiatric facility photographs. What exactly did you find? Articles about Amy Chun, about her disappearance from a Portland playground in 1987. The police questioned you about it. Claire was very quiet for a long moment, studying me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. When she finally spoke, her voice carried no emotion at all. The police questioned a lot of people about Amy Chun. They were desperate for leads, so they investigated anyone who'd been in the area. I was working at a daycare center nearby, so naturally they wanted to talk to me. But you weren't just in the area. You were at the playground when she disappeared. Who told you that? The question was asked with such sharp focus that I realized I'd made a mistake. I'd revealed information that could have only come from police files or witness statements, sources that my mother would know weren't publicly available. I read it in one of the newspaper articles. No, you didn't. Claire stood up from the table, her posture changing from maternal to predatory. That information was never released to the media. So I'll ask you again, Jessica, who told you that? The recording device felt like it was burning against my chest. Detective Santos had warned me that my mother was dangerous, but I'd underestimated how quickly she could shift from loving parent to calculating predator. I've been researching the case, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. There are true crime forums online that have information. Don't lie to me. Claire's voice was still calm, but there was something underneath it that made every instinct I had scream for me to run. I know what information is available publicly, and I know what isn't. Someone has been feeding you details from the police investigation. She moved closer to me, and I could see something in her eyes that I'd never seen before, the cold calculation that had been hidden behind 28 years of maternal love. Was it your grandfather? Did Henry give you those files before he died? I didn't answer, but my silence was confirmation enough. Oh, Jessica, she said, and her voice carried a sadness that seemed genuine. I'd hoped we'd never have to have this conversation. I'd hoped you'd never have to know the truth about who your mother really is. Claire walked to the kitchen window and closed the blinds with movements so casual they seemed rehearsed, as if she'd been planning for this moment my entire life. When she turned back to me, the last traces of maternal warmth had disappeared completely, replaced by the cold efficiency I'd seen in those psychiatric evaluation photos. Your grandfather was a foolish man who never understood what I was trying to accomplish, she said, sitting back down at the table with unsettling calmness. He thought I was sick, that I needed treatment. But I wasn't sick, Jessica. I was gifted. Gifted at what? At recognizing children who needed to be saved. At understanding which families were inadequate, which parents were neglectful, which children would be better off with someone who truly appreciated them. Claire's voice carried the fervor of someone who genuinely believed in their mission. Those children weren't happy where they were, Jessica. They needed someone who could love them properly. The recording device was capturing every word, but I was beginning to realize that my mother might not let me leave with the evidence. She'd spent 35 years protecting her secret. And now that it was exposed, she would do whatever was necessary to maintain her freedom. What happened to them? To Amy and Jessica Chun and the others? Claire tilted her head, studying me with the same calculating expression I'd seen her use when solving puzzles or planning complex projects. What do you think happened to them? I think you killed them. Killed them? She laughed, but the sound held no humor. Jessica, I would never hurt a child. Everything I did was to protect them from parents who didn't deserve them, from families who couldn't appreciate their specialness. Then where are they? If you didn't kill them, where are Amy Chun and Timothy Walsh and the others? They're safe, Claire said simply. They're in a place where they can't be hurt anymore, where they don't have to worry about inadequate parents or disappointing families. The vague answer was somehow more terrifying than a direct confession would have been. My mother spoke about the missing children as if they were still alive, but in a way that suggested their current state was beyond the reach of earthly concerns. Mom, you need to tell the police what you know. These families have been suffering for decades, wondering what happened to their children. Those families lost their children because they didn't deserve to keep them, Claire said with sudden vehemence. Do you think Amy Chun's parents appreciated what a special little girl they had? Do you think they understood her potential, her need for someone who could truly love her? They were her parents. They loved her. They loved the idea of her. They loved having a child to show off to their friends, to pose for family photographs, to fulfill their own emotional needs. But they didn't love Amy herself, her curiosity, her intelligence, her beautiful spirit. Claire stood and walked to the kitchen counter, opening a drawer that I'd never seen her access before. Inside were items that made my blood freeze, driver's licenses with different names and addresses, social security cards, birth certificates for children I didn't recognize. I've been preparing for this conversation for 28 years, she said, pulling out documents that looked like travel itineraries and bank account information. I knew eventually someone would start asking questions, connecting cases, piecing together patterns that would lead them to me. You're planning to run. I'm planning to relocate, just like I did in 1989 when things became complicated in Oregon. But this time, I won't be traveling alone. The implication hit me like a physical blow. My mother wasn't just planning to disappear, she was planning to take me with her, whether I wanted to go or not. I won't leave with you, I said, standing up from the table and backing toward the kitchen door. I won't be part of this. Oh, sweetheart, Claire said with genuine sadness. You've been part of this your entire life. Do you think it was a coincidence that your grandfather died just days before you found those files? Do you think it was natural causes that took him so quickly? My legs went weak as I understood what she was telling me. You killed Grandpa. I helped him transition peacefully when he became a threat to our family's security. Just like I helped those children transition to a place where they couldn't be hurt anymore. Claire was moving toward me now, her approach as patient and methodical as a hunter stalking prey. And just like I'll help anyone else who threatens what we've built together, I reached for the kitchen door handle. But Claire's voice stopped me. Jessica, there are police officers positioned outside this house, aren't there? Your new friends in law enforcement are hoping I'll confess to crimes they can't prove. So they equipped you with recording equipment and sent you here to betray the woman who raised you. My hand froze on the door handle as I realized my mother had known about the surveillance all along. She'd been playing a role during our conversation, giving me information that would sound incriminating but couldn't be used to prosecute her successfully. That's why you're going to call them right now, Claire continued, and tell them that I've had a medical emergency. Tell them I've collapsed and you need an ambulance. When they come inside, they'll find a tragic scene, a mother and daughter who died together in an accidental gas leak. She was holding something in her hand now, something small and metallic that looked like a remote control device. The beautiful thing about natural gas, she said conversationally, is that it's almost impossible to detect until it's too late. And when it explodes, it destroys evidence so completely that investigators can only make educated guesses about what really happened. I didn't wait to see what device Claire was holding. The moment she mentioned gas leaks and explosions, I yanked open the kitchen door and ran toward the backyard, screaming for the police officers Detective Santos had positioned around the house. Behind me I could hear Claire moving with surprising speed, but I had a head start and 28 years of motivation to stay alive. Officers down! Officers down! The frantic radio chatter told me that whatever Claire had been planning, it was already in motion. I could smell natural gas flooding the air around the house, and somewhere in the distance, I heard the sound of vehicles starting engines in panicked haste. Detective Santos materialized from behind a neighbor's garage, grabbing my arm and pulling me away from my childhood home. "Gas leak," she shouted over the chaos. "She's rigged the entire house to explode. We need to get clear now." We ran toward her unmarked police car as emergency vehicles screamed into the neighborhood. Behind us, my mother's house was glowing with an unnatural light that suggested gas concentrations had reached dangerous levels. "Where is she?" Detective Santos demanded as we reached her vehicle. "Where's your mother?" "I don't know. She was right behind me when I ran." I looked back at the house, expecting to see Claire emerging from the smoke and chaos, but there was no sign of her anywhere. The explosion, when it came, was smaller than I'd expected, but devastating in its precision. Instead of destroying the entire house, it created a concentrated blast in the kitchen area exactly where Claire would want investigators to believe we'd been sitting when the gas leak occurred. "She's not in there," I said with sudden certainty. "Mom planned this whole thing. She knew you were watching the house, knew I was wearing a wire, knew exactly how you'd respond to a gas emergency." Detective Santos was already on her radio, coordinating with other units and emergency responders. "All units, suspect Claire Patterson/Morrison is mobile and dangerous. Consider her armed and extremely dangerous." But even as police cordoned off the neighborhood and began their search, I knew they wouldn't find her. Claire had been planning this escape for decades, creating false identities and emergency protocols that would allow her to disappear completely when her secret was finally exposed. "She contacted you," Detective Santos said as we sat in her car, watching firefighters contain the blaze that had been my childhood home. "Women like your mother don't give up their primary attachment easily. She sees you as belonging to her, and she won't leave without trying to take you with her." I thought about the documents Claire had shown me, the driver's licenses and birth certificates for different identities. She hadn't been improvising tonight. She'd been executing a plan she'd been refining for years. My phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Jessica, I'm disappointed that you chose strangers over family. But I understand that you've been manipulated by people who don't know the whole truth. Meet me at Riverside Park tomorrow at noon, and I'll explain everything properly. Come alone, or more innocent people will get hurt." Riverside Park. The same Portland playground where Amy Chun had disappeared in 1987. My mother was inviting me to the scene of her first documented crime, probably as some kind of twisted closure to our relationship. "She wants to meet." I showed Detective Santos the message. "At the park where Amy Chun was taken. It's a trap. She's planning to eliminate you as a witness and disappear permanently. Or she's planning to take me with her, to start over somewhere else with a new identity." I thought about Claire's references to helping the missing children transition to someplace safe, her delusion that she was protecting them rather than harming them. "Detective, what if my mother didn't kill those children? What if she really believes she saved them? What are you suggesting? What if she has them somewhere? What if Amy Chun and the others are still alive?" Detective Santos stared at me with growing alarm. "Jessica, those children would be adults now. If they're still alive, if your mother has been keeping them somewhere for decades, double quotes." She didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. 5 children had been missing for 20 to 35 years. If they were still alive, they'd been imprisoned by my mother for most of their lives, raised in captivity by a woman who believed she was saving them from inadequate families. "I have to meet her," I said. "If there's any chance those children are alive, if there's any possibility of finding them, is too dangerous. She's already tried to kill you once tonight. She tried to fake our deaths to throw off the investigation. But she won't actually hurt me, Detective. I'm the child she chose to keep, remember? I'm the one she raised and loved and protected for 28 years. Detective Santos was quiet for a long moment, weighing the risks against the potential for finally closing 5 cold cases and possibly saving lives. "If we do this," she said finally, "it's under full surveillance with tactical backup positioned throughout the park. And if your mother so much as reaches into her purse, we take her down immediately." Riverside Park looked exactly as it had in the 1987 newspaper photographs. The same playground equipment, The same walking paths, the same open spaces where children had once played safely while their parents watched from nearby benches. But now it felt like a crime scene, haunted by the ghosts of 5 children who'd vanished from places just like this. Claire was waiting for me at the playground where Amy Chen had last been seen, sitting on a bench with the patient posture of someone who'd been expecting this meeting for decades. She looked older than she had just 12 hours ago, as if the explosion of her carefully maintained secret had aged her years in a single night. "Hello, Jessica," she said as I approached, her voice carrying the same maternal warmth that had comforted me through every childhood crisis. "I'm glad you came. I was afraid the police would try to stop you. They're watching," I said, settling onto the bench beside her with a distance that felt both protective and heartbreaking. "If you try to hurt me or take me anywhere, they'll intervene." "I would never hurt you," Claire said with genuine sadness. "You're my daughter, Jessica. Everything I've done for 35 years has been about protecting you and giving you the best life possible." Around the park, I could see Detective Santos and her team positioned at strategic points, close enough to respond to threats but far enough away to allow conversation. Everyone was hoping that Claire would finally confess to what had happened to the missing children. "Tell me about Amy Chen," I said. "Tell me what really happened that day in 1987. Claire was quiet for a long moment, staring at the playground equipment where a 6-year-old girl had vanished 35 years ago. "Amy was special," she said finally. "Bright, curious, trusting. She deserved parents who understood her potential, who could give her the attention and love she needed. So you took her, rescued her from a family that was too busy with their own lives to appreciate what a remarkable child they had." Claire's voice carried the conviction of someone who genuinely believed in her mission. "Amy's parents worked long hours, left her with babysitters, enrolled her in daycare programs where she was just another child among dozens. That doesn't give you the right to steal her from her family. It gave me the responsibility to save her," Claire corrected firmly. "Just like I saved Timothy and Sarah and Kevin and Jessica. Just like I would have saved you if you needed rescuing from inadequate parents." The way she spoke about the missing children in past tense, as if their childhoods were completed chapters rather than ongoing traumas, made my blood run cold. "Where are they now, Mom? Where are Amy and the others?" Claire smiled with genuine warmth, the expression transforming her face into something almost peaceful. "They're waiting for us, sweetheart. They've been waiting for so long to meet their new sister." The words hit me like a physical blow. "They're alive?" "Of course they're alive. Did you think I would hurt children? Everything I've done has been about protecting them, giving them a safe place where they could grow up surrounded by love and understanding." She pulled out her phone and showed me photographs that made my world tilt sideways. 5 adults who looked to be in their 20s and 30s, sitting around a dinner table in what appeared to be a rustic cabin setting. Despite the years that had passed, I could recognize features from the missing children's photos: Amy Chen's bright eyes, Timothy Walsh's stubborn chin, Sarah Mitchell's gentle smile. "They're my family," Claire said with pride that seemed completely genuine. "Our family. They've been waiting so patiently for the day when you could join us permanently." I stared at the photographs, trying to process what I was seeing. The missing children weren't dead. They were adults now, living in some kind of compound or a community that my mother had created, but their expressions troubled me. They smiled at the camera, but their eyes held an emptiness that suggested years of psychological manipulation. Where is this place? Somewhere safe, somewhere far from the families that failed them, from the society that would have corrupted them. Claire tucked the phone back into her pocket. "Jessica, I need you to understand that everything the police told you about me is wrong. I'm not a kidnapper or a killer. I'm a protector. I save children from inadequate parents and give them the love they deserve. By imprisoning them for decades, by providing them with a stable, loving environment where they can develop their full potential without the interference of people who don't understand their specialness." Claire reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "They're happy, Jessica. They're grateful for the life I've given them. They've been brainwashed, conditioned to believe that being held prisoner is somehow better than freedom. Freedom to what? To struggle with parents who don't appreciate them. To navigate a society that would damage their pure spirits." Claire's voice was rising with passionate conviction. I've given them something precious, a family that truly loves them, a community where they're valued and protected. Detective Santos was moving closer now, probably responding to the emotional intensity of our conversation. But I needed to know more before the arrest happened. What about their real families? What about Amy's parents who've been searching for her for 35 years? Claire's expression darkened. Those people gave up their right to call themselves parents the moment they failed to protect and cherish the children I rescued. They don't deserve closure, Jessica. They deserve to live with the consequences of their inadequacy. That's when I finally understood the full scope of my mother's delusion. She didn't just believe she was saving children, she believed the parents deserved to suffer for their perceived failures. The decades of anguish experienced by the families wasn't an unfortunate side effect of her crimes. It was part of the punishment she thought they deserved. Come with me, Claire said, standing from the bench with sudden urgency. Come meet your brothers and sisters. Come see what a real family looks like when it's built on genuine love instead of biological accident. Claire's invitation hung in the air between us as Detective Santos and her tactical team closed in, weapons drawn but held low to avoid triggering a hostage situation. My mother seemed unaware of the approaching officers, her attention focused entirely on convincing me to join her twisted version of a perfect family. Jessica, we don't have much time, she said urgently. The police will try to separate us, to convince you that what I've built is wrong, but you've seen the photographs. You've seen how happy and healthy your brothers and sisters are. Don't let strangers destroy what we could have together. I looked at this woman who'd raised me with genuine love and devotion while simultaneously destroying 5 families and imprisoning their children for decades. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. How could someone be both a caring mother and a monster capable of such systematic cruelty? Mom, I said quietly, those people are my brothers and sisters. They're victims who've been conditioned to accept captivity as love. And their real families, the Chuns, the Walshes, the Mitchells, the Barnes, they've been living in agony for decades, wondering what happened to their children. Those families failed their children, Claire insisted, her voice taking on the fervent tone I'd heard earlier. They proved they were inadequate by allowing their children to be taken. Strong parents, loving parents, would have protected them better. The cruel logic was breathtaking. Claire had blamed the victims for their own victimization, used their parents' inability to prevent kidnapping as proof that the kidnapping was justified. Claire Patterson, Detective Santos called out from 20 feet away. You're under arrest for multiple counts of kidnapping and child endangerment. Keep your hands visible and step away from Jessica. My mother turned to look at the officers surrounding us, but instead of fear or anger, her expression showed only disappointment. I'd hoped we could do this privately, she said to me. I'd hoped you would choose family over strangers voluntarily. These aren't strangers, Mom. They're police officers trying to reunite stolen children with their real families. And what about our family? What about the 28 years we've spent loving each other? Does that mean nothing to you? The question broke my heart because it revealed the fundamental tragedy of our situation. Claire's love for me was real, but it existed alongside her complete inability to understand the destruction she'd caused to others. She genuinely believed that her crimes were acts of love, that stealing children was a form of rescue. It means everything to me, I said, tears streaming down my face. But love doesn't excuse what you've done. Those children you saved, they had parents who loved them too. Families who've never stopped searching for them. Final warning, Detective Santos shouted. Hands visible, step away from Jessica, get on the ground now. Claire looked at me one last time, her expression mixing love and regret and something that might have been pride. I want you to remember that everything I did was for you, she said softly. The new identities, the careful relocations, the years of planning, all of it was about giving you a safe, stable life with a mother who would love you properly. I know, I whispered. And I do remember. I'll always remember. Claire smiled, then did something that surprised everyone. Instead of resisting arrest or attempting to flee, she carefully placed her hands on her head and knelt on the playground grass where Amy Chen had last been seen 35 years ago. Detective Santos, she called out calmly, I'm ready to cooperate fully with your investigation. But I have conditions for providing information about the location of the children. What conditions? I want complete immunity for Jessica. Whatever evidence you think connects her to my actions, whatever suspicions you might have about her knowledge of my activities, I want legal guarantees that she will never be prosecuted for anything related to these cases. Detective Santos looked at me with surprise. Jessica isn't a suspect in these crimes, but she might become one when you discover how many years I've been planning this lifestyle, how many preparations I made that required assistance or at least passive knowledge. Claire's voice was businesslike now, as if she were negotiating a contract rather than surrendering to arrest. I want her protected before I reveal the location of the compound where the others are waiting. The compound. She was finally acknowledging that Amy Chan and the other missing children were being held somewhere, probably had been imprisoned there for decades. Mom, I said, just tell them where the children are. Don't make this about protecting me. Everything I've ever done has been about protecting you, Claire said as officers moved in to place her in handcuffs. And I won't stop protecting you now, even if it means spending the rest of my life in prison. As they led her away, she called back to me, Jessica, when they find the others, remember that they chose to stay. After the first few years, they could have left any time they wanted. They stayed because they understood what real family feels like. 2 days later, FBI agents raided a compound in rural Montana based on information Claire provided in exchange for my guaranteed immunity. They found 5 adults living in conditions that were comfortable but isolated, surrounded by books and art supplies and evidence of education, but cut off completely from the outside world. Amy Chun was 39 years old. She'd been 8 when she was taken, and she'd spent 31 years believing that her parents had abandoned her and that Claire was her savior. When agents told her that her real parents were still alive and had never stopped searching for her, she broke down completely. The psychological rehabilitation would take years. The legal proceedings would take longer. But for the first time in decades, 5 families would have the chance to reclaim their stolen children and begin healing from trauma that had defined their lives. As for me, I was left to process the reality that the woman who loved me unconditionally for 28 years was also responsible for decades of suffering that could never be fully repaired. Love and evil had existed side by side in my mother, and I would spend the rest of my life trying to understand how both could be equally real. But at least the children were coming home, and sometimes that has to be enough.